So welcome back, guys. Today we're going to be talking about super simple sketching and super simple painting. One of the things I think people find the hardest when it comes to using watercolour is selecting what colours to use, and I just really want to show you that by using just two colours, or even just one, you can create masterpieces. You can create stuff that you're really super proud of. So one of the benefits of using just one or two colours, apart from the idea that it's just a lot more chilled, is it actually helps you learn a little bit more about values. Now, a good example of that is if you were doing a really simple value study. I've done something that's very similar to a value study with water-soluble ink. I can show you some examples of that here, where it's just one colour, but what you're looking to find is your dark point and your light point, but you're just using one colour, and that's great because it takes away all the stress of are the trees the right colour of green, or is that house the right colour of brick, or whatever. So this is a really interesting method, but it's also a great way of learning. So enough tell, should we get on with a bit of show? Crack on. So as you can see from the reference drawing, we're behind a pub here in Staithes, and we've got all the beer barrels here ready for collection. And it's one of those little scenes that can seem quite insignificant actually. And when you get, most people are tempted to sketch the seafronts and sketch the, the kind of the more scenic buildings in a way. But for me, I grew up in a coastal town near Staithes in Whitby. And I remember I knew where all the back alleys were around the whole town, and often when it was very busy with tourists in summer, I would use the back alleys as conduits to get from one place to another. So this is a very familiar vernacular for me. This makes me feel very much at home, and I love those beer barrels. They look great. So as you can see here, what I've done is I'm using pencil for a start because I want to get this proportionally reasonably accurate. I did actually do a version before which you didn't see in pen, and it was such a mess up. I was just not really feeling it this day, so I thought I'll use a bit of a safety blanket and go in with pencil. You may notice that with the pencil I've put a cross across the whole of the area that I'm choosing to sketch within, and that's to give me an idea of where I want a center point to be. So I wanted really roughly that the top of that big fat drain pipe that you see in the middle of the reference drawing to be there. So I'm not doing a lot of detail with the pencil sketch. The pencil sketch is to give me structure, not detail. So what I'm using it for is just to say this area here is roughly going to be this building. This area here is roughly where the window's going to be, and I'll go in and do a little bit more of the detail stuff when I actually put the pen work in. So really, there isn't a lot to this drawing really. It's quite a simple sort of view. I won't really talk about even perspective because you can get a lot of the angles just from sort of observation really. But there's a few features that I quite like. I quite like that beautiful lamp up there, and I love the electricity or the phone wires, going up to that, radiating from the top of that pole. I think it's super cool. So here I'm just adding in a little bit of perspective. You might have noticed that I've changed the wall at the bottom just to simplify it a bit. And I love the kind of drain pipes and all that sort of stuff. That really for me makes it, not only is it sort of ties it to a building, it dates the building, but it also gives the building its kind of like character. So really it's just a case of going in with the line work now. Now I'm using a lovely 0.8 wide fine liner. I go through periods of using really thin fine liners, 0.1s, but at the moment I'm really enjoying using these big chunky lined fine liners. I feel that you get a lot more line variation with a really wide fine liner. It feels almost a bit more like a fountain pen in a way, and I do enjoy that line variation. Sometimes I like doing line work which feels a little bit scratchy and kind of impressionistic and almost quite detailed in a way. Other times I love doing line work that feels quite cartoony. I quite like it when it feels oversimplified and a little bit like a sort of children's book illustration. I don't mean it's juvenile, because it really isn't. It's just a very different style, if you know what I mean. Slightly comic book feel to it. I do like that. Check out my Patreon, where for a small fee every month you can get full versions feedback from myself about your art. Join the community. So do check that out. There's a link in my bio. Thank you. So I'm just making a few of these features slightly bigger here, like these vents here. I've decided not to do two. I'm just doing one, but I'm making it bigger so it feels a bit more distinctive. On the right hand side here, I'm just reinforcing that line width on the outside just to really make that pop forward and to make the eye see that, you know, these are really big in the foreground. You can often use line widths like that to bring items forward, or small line widths to push them back. Or even if you're using nylon wash as a method and you're using, you know, lines and watercolour, stuff that's in the far distance, you know, like the sky, you wouldn't use any lines on at all. So these barrels, you know, I've just kind of suggested them. I'm not actually trying to wholly replicate what's there. I'm just looking at some different angles and really sketching them in quite loosely. I think if you didn't know what they were, an accurate drawing really wouldn't help, if you know what I mean. And these beautiful stone flags, they're grey, aren't they? So here in the distance, we've got these little cottages and the backs of those. The angle of those roofs, they're quite steep, and often when they're at that sort of acute angle, it's quite difficult to get a feel for the sort of perspective in them in a way. So I'll sometimes level them out a little bit, if that makes sense. Now that chimney's gone a bit weird, hasn't it? But it doesn't matter. Now you might also notice that in the reference drawing, the roof doesn't bisect the pole, but it does in mine. And again, don't care. It sounds like I'm being negligent here, but it's not that. It's just the idea is that you're not going to sit there and go, well, I think it's that street, but I know from that angle that that roof doesn't touch that pole. You're not going to do it. You're either going to know the scene or not. And if you want accuracy, take a photo. You know, this is you. This is your character. This is your kind of shorthand, if you know what I mean. In the same way that, you know, a poem shouldn't be a literal... I'll say that. So when it comes to doing some of the detail, I wanted to use... I want you to start with a monotone. So here for the colouring, what I'm doing is, I'm mixing my initial two colours together. So I'm mixing together that blue, so I'm mixing together that ultramarine blue, and I'm mixing together the rosehip, and that's going to give me this grey. And I'm going to start with the grey, because what I'm really after here is a monochrome feel, with a couple of really cool little colour pops. Now, you could definitely colour this whole scene in, you know, you could put in that beautiful sandstone and that blue building and things. But I just thought it'd be a bit more interesting to try something a little bit different and actually show you a bit more of a simple way of doing stuff. So you feel a bit less, you might feel a little bit less intimidated in sort of having a go yourself. And the other benefit of this is, when it comes to dealing with shadows and contrast, you know, hopefully you'll see where you can actually add in a little bit of detail, a little bit of extra shadow and a little bit of extra contrast, and it will really help you tell that story. So what I've done now is I put in a first layer of shadow. Now it might not always be wholly accurate to the reference drawing, and in fact the shadows in themselves might not always make a lot of sense in terms of the angles, but they're there to sort of show the form, if you know what I mean. And you're also using, don't forget, you're also using that monochrome paint to show detail. So it may be that some of the paint is going in for shadows and some of the paint is going in for detail. So going back in with the mop brush. Now the reason why I'm using the mop brush here is, again, it's not to delineate shadows. It's not to show shadows. It's to show there is variation in the colour of the stonework. So you actually, and to a certain extent, if you add more contrast to the stonework in the foreground, it also pulls it forward a little bit. And here I've realised I've missed a little bit of shadow on the underneath of the hollow part of the lantern. So obviously you can see here I'm adding a little bit of red in. Now this is just straight rosehip. And now you can see I've actually added a swatch on the left hand side here. This is quite useful. So you can see that I've got Rosehip, French Ultramarine, and then you can see that beautiful mix together and how that works. And hopefully I can maybe do a close-up of that. So here, what I've decided to do is I've left it actually about a week, and it's been sitting on the mantelpiece, and I've come back to it, and I've thought, you know, if you're going to put a colour pop on those chimneys, why not integrate a bit of the blue? Now I don't know whether you remember on the reference drawing of the barrels, I might put a picture up there. There was some coloured bands which you often put on barrels to sort of denote who they belong to and things like that. So I thought I'd replicate some of the colours on the barrels by using a little bit of this French Ultramarine and a little bit of the Rosehip colour. Now these are both, the watercolour I'm using here is by Deep Light, which are a Latvian company who I've recently started working with, and they make some fabulous colours. And at the moment I'm just exploring all the wonderful options and the wonderful paints that they sell, and it's, yeah, I'm having a great time. So there you go, that's the sort of finished image. Now you can see the colour pop is gonna draw your eye in around the barrels, and then it's gonna, your eye is gonna go up through the picture and maybe back to where those chimneys are. So I hope you enjoyed that. I thought it was a really fun one. I think it really shows you the value of just trying to simplify your drawings in terms of colours. You know, don't drown too much. I also think it's a nice example of when you don't really have to have a large amount of bright colour for something to really pop. You can have just a tiny little amount of red or blue or yellow or a bright colour in quite a monochrome scene, and that's really going to jump off the page. So it's really fun to have fun with creating those little pops of colour and those little highlights. I think particularly at the moment the world's a bit of a scary place, and there's lots of conflict and there's lots of disagreement and disharmony, and I'd like to think that, well, I know I can't solve any of that. It's hard enough to keep one's own head above water some days, but I can certainly try and spread a bit of love through my art, and that's one of the things that is one of the reasons I do this. I'm not a big fan of social media, I must admit. I don't think it's necessarily a very positive space to be in, but I think what I try and do is push a little bit of calmness and a little bit of joy out there. And like with all these art projects, if you can find some space, allow yourself, you know, half an hour, turn the TV off, turn off the phone, and sit down with yourself and just have a play, have some freedom from all the sad news. For 10 minutes, you're laughing. Well, you're not laughing, but you're crying less. You're certainly winning. Okay, thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.